The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Washington Irving. Chapter 1. Ichabod Crane. Ichabod Crane was a teacher at the local school. He wasn't much of a fighter or a strong man, but he loved to tell stories, especially about ghosts and witches. His students loved listening to his tales. But there was one thing that frightened Ichabod more than anything: the eerie ghost of Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow was a quiet town, surrounded by thick forests where people rarely went after dark. But rumours always travelled fast. Some said there was a ghost haunting the village, a ghost with no head who rode through the night on a dark horse. This ghost was known as the Headless Horseman, a terrifying figure always riding through the night looking for something or someone. Chapter 2. Ichabod's Encounter with Katrina. Now, Ichabod had another reason for spending so much time in Sleepy Hollow. He had his eye on a beautiful woman named Katrina Van Tassel. She was rich and kind, and Ichabod believed that if he won her heart, he could have a comfortable life. But there was a problem. There was another man in town who liked Katrina too. His name was Brom Bones. Brom was a strong, handsome man who loved to play pranks on others, especially Ichabod. Brom wasn't a fan of Ichabod. He didn't want to see him win Katrina's heart. So Brom decided to play a trick on Ichabod, especially when he heard that Ichabod planned to propose to Katrina at the upcoming Van Tassel party. Chapter 3. The Party and the Ride Home. One night, as the stars twinkled above Sleepy Hollow, the Van Tassel family held a grand party. Ichabod, dressed in his best clothes, couldn't wait to ask Katrina for her hand in marriage. But little did he know, Brom Bones had something else planned. During the party, Brom kept making fun of Ichabod, teasing him with ghost stories. Ichabod, wanting to impress Katrina, sat down to tell a spooky tale of his own. The guests listened intently, their eyes wide with fear, as Ichabod spoke of the Headless Horseman. But when the party ended, Ichabod's fear wasn't just a story. He was about to meet the ghost for real. As Ichabod made his way home through the dark woods, the moonlight barely pierced through the trees. He felt a strange chill in the air. The sounds of the forest were eerily quiet. Suddenly, he heard it. The galloping of hooves, clip-clop, clip-clop. Ichabod turned around, and to his horror there was a figure riding toward him. A tall rider on a black horse, but the rider had no head. The Headless Horseman. Chapter 4. The Chase. Ichabod's heart raced as the Headless Horseman chased him through the forest. He tried to outrun the ghost, galloping as fast as his horse could carry him. But no matter how hard he tried, the Headless Horseman stayed right behind him, getting closer and closer. In his panic, Ichabod thought of turning toward the bridge. It was said that the Headless Horseman couldn't cross the bridge. It was the only place where he was powerless. With a final burst of energy, Ichabod urged his horse faster, heading straight for the bridge. But as he neared it, he heard the terrifying sound of the horseman's hooves right behind him. Suddenly, with a terrifying roar, the Headless Horseman hurled something at Ichabod. It was a pumpkin. The heavy fruit hit Ichabod's head, and he fell from his horse, unconscious. Chapter 5. The Mystery. The next day, the villagers searched for Ichabod, but found no trace of him. His horse, gun, and hat were all left behind, but no sign of Ichabod. Some said the Headless Horseman had taken him away forever. Others believed he had run away, frightened by the ghost. To this day, no one knows what happened to Ichabod Crane. The only thing left of him were the rumours, stories of a schoolteacher who had dared to cross paths with the Headless Horseman. Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox, American Folklore. Chapter 1. The Birth of Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan wasn't born in a typical way. In fact, the stories say that when Paul was just a baby, he was so big that it took 5 storks to carry him to his parents. From the moment he was born, it was clear that Paul would be no ordinary man. As Paul grew up, he became stronger and bigger. By the time he was a teenager, he was already as tall as a mountain. People from all over the land would come to watch him work. When Paul picked up an axe, the trees would shake and fall down like dominoes. He could chop a tree so fast that it would take a whole crew of men just to keep up with him. Chapter 2: The Creation of the Great Lakes. One of Paul's most famous feats was the creation of the Great Lakes. Legend has it that one winter, Paul and Babe were out working in the snow. Paul needed a place to store all the snow, so he asked Babe to dig a giant hole. With a single swing of his axe, Paul cleared the land, and Babe used his giant hooves to scoop out the snow. After days of work, the hole they had dug was filled with water, and thus the Great Lakes were born. But it wasn't just the lakes that Paul and Babe created. Wherever they went, they shaped the land. The rivers, mountains, and forests all bore the marks of Paul's strength and Babe's help. Chapter 3: The Giant's Yawns and the Wind. As Paul and Babe travelled across the land, they would sometimes take a nap. But Paul's naps were no ordinary naps. Every time he yawned, a strong wind would blow across the entire forest. One day, Paul let out the biggest yawn he'd ever made, and the wind was so powerful that it blew down a forest of trees, creating the Mississippi River. Paul and Babe didn't just create lakes and rivers, they changed the entire landscape. In fact, there were so many places in the land that were touched by Paul's giant hands that people started to refer to him as the King of the Forest. Chapter 4: The Story of Babe the Blue Ox. Babe, Paul's faithful companion, was more than just an ox, he was Paul's right-hand friend. Babe was incredibly strong and could carry massive loads that even the strongest of horses couldn't pull. One of the most famous stories about Babe is how he helped Paul in the harsh winter. One year, the winter was particularly cold and snowy. The snow piled so high that the trees in the forest couldn't grow, and the animals couldn't find food. Paul needed to clear the trees, but no one could help him except Babe. Babe pulled trees from the ground, one after another, helping Paul clear a path through the forest. Together they saved the land, and the animals returned to their homes. Chapter 5: The Legend Lives On. Paul Bunyan and Babe continued to have many adventures. They cleared forests, built mountains, and created valleys. Their travels took them far and wide, and every town they visited, people would talk about the giant lumberjack and his blue ox. Some say that Paul and Babe still roam the wilderness, continuing their work and creating legends. Wherever there's a giant tree or a massive mountain, it's said to be the mark of Paul's great strength and Babe's loyal companionship. The story of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox has become an important part of American folklore, reminding everyone that sometimes the impossible is just a matter of belief and a little help from your friends. The Pied Piper of Hamelin, German folk tale. Introduction. Once upon a time, in a beautiful town nestled between green hills and winding rivers, there was a place called Hamelin. It was a happy town, full of cheerful people, colourful houses, and narrow cobbled streets. But one day, something terrible happened. The town of Hamelin was invaded by rats. Big rats, small rats, fat rats, thin rats, they were everywhere. They scurried across rooftops, snuck into kitchens, and even swam in the fountains. The people of Hamelin were terrified and didn't know what to do. The mayor tried traps, poison, and even cats, but nothing worked. The rats only multiplied. Chapter 1: The Arrival of the Stranger. Just when the town had lost all hope, a strange man arrived. He wore a long, colourful coat and a feathered hat, and carried a magical flute. His name was never known, but people called him the Pied Piper because of the bright, multicoloured clothes he wore. The Pied Piper went straight to the town hall and said, "I can rid your town of all rats, but you must pay me 1,000 gold coins." Desperate, the mayor agreed at once. Chapter 2. The Music Begins. The Pied Piper walked into the town square, pulled out his flute, and began to play a strange, cheerful melody. It wasn't long before something incredible happened. The rats began to pour out of every building. From under floorboards, behind doors, and out of sewers they rushed toward the music. Entranced by the magical tune, they followed the Pied Piper as he marched through the streets, down to the river outside the town. There he walked to the water's edge, still playing, and one by one the rats jumped into the river and disappeared beneath the waves. Just like that, Hamelin was free of rats. Chapter 3. A Broken Promise. The townspeople rejoiced. They sang, they danced, they feasted. But when the Pied Piper returned to the mayor for his reward, the mayor refused. 1,000 gold coins for playing a tune. You'll take 20 and be thankful." The Pied Piper's eyes grew dark, and his cheerful smile vanished. "You broke your promise," he said quietly. "I kept mine. Now I shall return." The townspeople laughed and called him foolish, but that night something strange happened again. Chapter 4. The Piper Returns. The next morning the Pied Piper came back. This time he wore a darker coat, and his melody was different, haunting and beautiful. He walked through the streets playing his flute, but instead of rats it was the children of Hamelin who came out of their homes, boys and girls laughing and dancing, following the piper just like the rats had done. The townspeople watched in shock as the children marched through the streets, out of the town gates and into the hills beyond. They called their names, they shouted and cried, but the children did not stop. The Pied Piper led them into a mountain, and with a flash of light and a rumble of thunder, the mountain closed behind them. Only one child remained behind, a little boy who had a limp and couldn't keep up. Through tears, he told the townspeople what had happened, but the rest of the children were never seen again. Chapter 5. The Lesson of Hamelin. The people of Hamelin were filled with sorrow. Their town was quiet again, but it would never be joyful. They had learned a hard lesson. A promise is a promise. If you break your word, you might lose more than you expected. To this day, people still speak of the Pied Piper. Some say he was a magician, others think he was just a man with a powerful gift. But all agree his music could lead anyone, anywhere. And if you ever hear a flute playing a strange melody, maybe, just maybe, it's the piper returning once again. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Aesop's Fables. Chapter 1. The Bored Shepherd. Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by hills and green fields, there lived a young boy. He worked as a shepherd, which means he looked after sheep. Every day he took the flock up the hill to graze, while the village stayed below, busy with daily chores. At first the boy enjoyed the job. The sky was blue, the air was fresh, and the sheep were peaceful. But after a while, he got bored. There was no one to talk to, no games to play. Just sheep, and more sheep. One afternoon, as he watched the sheep lazily munching on grass, he had an idea, a mischievous idea. Chapter 2. The First Lie. He stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Wolf! Wolf! A wolf is attacking the sheep!" Down in the village, the people heard his cry and panicked. The baker dropped his bread, the blacksmith ran out of his shop, and the farmers grabbed sticks and tools. Everyone rushed up the hill to help. When they got there, they saw no wolf, just the boy sitting on a rock laughing. "I fooled you," he giggled. "There was no wolf." The villagers were not amused. "Don't do that again," the mayor warned. "It's not a joke." The boy shrugged. It was funny. Chapter 3. The Second Trick. A few days later, the boy grew bored again, and just like before, he shouted, "Wolf! Wolf! A big, scary wolf is here!" Once again, the villagers dropped everything and ran up the hill. Once again, there was no wolf, just the boy, rolling on the ground with laughter. "You came again," he laughed. "You're so easy to fool." This time the villagers were angry. "You won't be laughing when a real wolf comes," said one. "You'll regret it," said another. But the boy didn't listen. He was too busy having fun. Chapter 4. The Real Wolf. Then, one cloudy afternoon, something changed. As the boy sat watching the sheep, he heard a rustle in the bushes. He turned his head, and his eyes went wide. There, with gleaming eyes and sharp teeth, stood a real wolf. The boy jumped to his feet, terrified. The wolf growled and crept closer to the sheep. The boy screamed, "Wolf! Wolf! Please help! A real wolf is here!" But down in the village, no one came. They had heard this cry before. They thought he was lying again. The boy shouted and cried, but no help arrived. The wolf chased the sheep and scattered them across the field. The boy tried to fight it off, but he was too small, too scared. When he finally returned to the village, he was in tears. "The wolf was real," he sobbed. "I was telling the truth." The villagers looked at him sadly. "But we didn't believe you," they said, "because you lied before." Chapter 5. The Lesson. From that day on, the boy never told lies again. He learned the hard way that if you lie, people won't trust you, even when you're telling the truth. And the village never forgot the lesson either. They taught it to their children and their children's children, so that everyone would remember, always tell the truth, because trust is easy to lose and hard to earn back. The Fisherman and the Genie, Arabian Nights. Chapter 1. The poor fisherman. Long, long ago, in a land of deserts and palaces, lived a poor fisherman. Every morning he walked to the sea with his old fishing net and a small basket, hoping to catch enough fish to feed his family. But this fisherman was not lucky. Most days he caught only 1 or 2 fish, and sometimes nothing at all. One morning he threw his net into the sea once, twice, 3 times, and caught nothing. On the 4th try, something heavy pulled on the net. Excited, he pulled with all his strength, but instead of a fish, he found an old brass bottle sealed with a lead cap and strange symbols carved into its sides. Chapter 2. The Genie appears. Curious, the fisherman pulled off the cap. Suddenly, thick black smoke burst from the bottle. It twisted and swirled, rising into the sky and forming into a giant, a genie. The genie's voice boomed, "Free at last! I am the great genie of the sea." At first, the fisherman was amazed. "Wow, a real genie! Will you grant me wishes?" But the genie's face turned cold. "No," he said, "I've been trapped in that bottle for hundreds of years. At first I swore to reward whoever set me free, but after the first 100 years, I swore to kill them instead." The fisherman stepped back terrified. "But I saved you!" he cried. The genie growled, "And now you will die." Chapter 3. The Clever Plan. The fisherman knew he had to think fast. He bowed politely and said, "O mighty genie, before you destroy me, I must ask something." The genie raised an eyebrow. "Speak quickly." The fisherman asked, "You're so huge. How did you fit into that tiny bottle?" The genie laughed. "You doubt me? I can become smoke and return to the bottle whenever I want." "Prove it," said the fisherman. Proudly, the genie turned into smoke again and swirled back into the bottle. Quick as lightning, the fisherman slammed the cap back on. The genie roared from inside the bottle, "Let me out!" The fisherman smiled. "Not unless you promise to do me no harm." Trapped once more, the genie had no choice. He promised. The fisherman opened the bottle again, but this time the genie bowed and said, "You have outsmarted me. You are wise and kind. Ask your wish." Chapter 4. The Reward. The fisherman asked for enough food for his family, and the genie gave him gold and silver, fish and fruit, and magical nets that would never tear. The fisherman thanked him, and the genie vanished into the sea, this time free at last, and with no anger in his heart. The fisherman returned home and lived happily, always remembering, even when things seem impossible, clever thinking can save the day.